Do it, okay? Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you that we can meet together, Father, that you've blessed us with so many things, Lord, that we have and we often take for granted. Pray that you would just speak to us today, Lord. Ultimately, we want to hear from you, Father, because you have the words of life, Lord. And pray that you would just speak to all of our hearts what we need to hear and open our minds and our eyes to what you have for us today, Lord. So we love you. Thank you. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys can start turning to 1 Kings chapter 19, continuing our series in Elijah. So we're going to go ahead and read through this, verses 1 through 18, and then we'll come back and talk about it. We're starting in verse 1. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now. O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water, and he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek to take my life away." And he said, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountain and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." So let's do a little recap here. So if you guys have been here the past couple weeks, you'd know what's kind of going on so far. So there's two kingdoms right now, right? Israel and Judah. And Ahab is the king of Israel, and he's married to Jezebel. And neither of them are what you would call savory characters, right? They're pretty wicked, and they lead Israel into wickedness as well. And Elijah shows up, and he says, "Okay, if you don't want to follow the Lord, you're not going to get the blessings of the Lord either." And he says, "It's not going to rain until I say so," right? So 3 years go by, and it doesn't rain in Israel. And that's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, we were just talking, I guess last week. It didn't rain for like almost 3 weeks, and everybody was like, "When's the rain coming? We're in trouble." And it was like, "Oh, it's nice, right? Rain." So 3 years go by, not a drop of rain. So Elisha comes back, and he basically, what comes is like the ultimate showdown, right, in Old Testament history, one of the ultimate showdowns. And he says, "Okay, if Yahweh is God, let's follow him. If Baal's God, let's follow him. But we're going to put it to the test. And this is what we're going to do. We're both going to set up an altar, and we're going to prepare a bull for sacrifice. Whoever's God can make those spontaneously combust, that's going to be God, right? That's going to be the God that we serve, and evidentially God." So they say, great. So Elijah gives them every advantage, right? It's 450 prophets of Baal versus just Elijah, right? So he's outnumbered. He gives them the best time of day, right? The hottest part of the day. And he gives them hours to do it, right? So they literally have every advantage that you could think of in this situation. And nothing happens. They go for hours, zero. And so Elijah gets up to bat. He builds his altar. He prepares his bull. And not only does Elijah not have those advantages, he actually handicaps himself. He says, okay, not only are we going to do that, we're going to take some water and we're going to drench the entire thing. Just douse it in water. And they're like, okay, right? They're probably more than willing to go with that. And so he does. And sure enough, he prays to God and fire falls, boom. And not only does it consume the sacrifice in the altar, but it actually dries up all the water as well, right? So after this happens, they kill the prophets of Baal. Elijah says, Ahab, you better get home. A rain is a-coming. And sure enough, torrential rain, right? He prays to God, torrential rain just comes down in like almost like hurricane force, I'm sure. And that pretty much brings us to where we are here, right? So it's like I said, ultimate showdown. Really, if there's any way, like they say, you can't really prove God's existence, maybe not. But this is about as close as you're going to get, right? About as close as you're going to get. Fire falling, all this stuff. Okay, so picking up in verse 1. Pick up in the story. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so sorry about that whole confusion with the God thing. You know, we thought Baal was God, but clearly he's not. Yahweh's God. We're going to tear down all of the Baal altars. We're going to, start following after Yahweh. Sorry about the whole threats to your life thing and everything. Why don't you come over for dinner sometime? We'd love to make it up to you. No, not if you're paying attention. That's not what she says at all, right? What does she actually say? So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. She's talking about the prophets. She's basically she's threatening him, right? She's putting out a hit on Elijah. Now, kind of usually if you would think, okay, if I had even heard someone saying, oh yeah, like fire came down from heaven and all this stuff happened, you might be like, oh, you know what? I might have a few things wrong about how I see the world, right? Maybe Yahweh is God. You would think that would be the case, but no. She digs in her heels basically and says, I don't care. I'm gonna do what I want, and I'm gonna follow the God that I want, right? Despite some pretty blatant evidence, right? What causes people to reject obvious truths, right? And ultimately the answer, especially in this case, is pride, right? Pride, if we could boil it down to like a sentence, pride is my will be done instead of thy will be done, right? So Satan being the ultimate example of pride, where God had made him for a certain purpose to do something, and he says, no, it's not good enough. I want to be greater. I want to be something better than what God has made me to be. And ultimately, it's to his detriment. And it's going to be to Jezebel's detriment as well. And for whatever reasons that, she prefers this, at the end of the day, nobody really likes to change. At least I don't. I would be fully forward with you in that one. There are times in my life where, I'll just say, oftentimes in my marriage, my wife will come to me like, Ben, you're a little like this, and you should be less like this. And it's true, you know what I mean? Like, it's true, but you're like, oh, I don't want to admit that that's true. Why? Because now I got to change, right? I got to change my behaviors. And that's the thing. We fall in these patterns that are either comfortable or we just like them. Jezebel, her position was more likely that she had status in the church of Baal, if you want to call it that. And that probably led her to some power and probably some pleasures as well. And she's not, even though it's clear that Baal is a non-God, right? She doesn't want to give that up. And it's easy to look at Old Testament examples, especially when we see like miracles and say, well, that would never happen to me, right? Well, I tend to think maybe it would. Like maybe we're not that different. Maybe there are things in our lives that we see that are evidence of God and that we oftentimes ignore. Because why? They're just truths that come. And it's like, hey, if it's the truth, we have to accept it. It's as plain and simple as that. Whether it's easy for us or difficult, it doesn't matter. And ultimately, we'll see later down the road, her rejection of the truth is going to lead to her demise, but that's coming. So that's the question for a personal application. The question is, are there truths in our lives today that we can think of that we're resisting rather than accepting? Sometimes we just don't know. Sometimes we just don't know the truth, and we're blissfully ignorant. But God's going to bring those along our way, and the question is, how do we respond to those truths, especially when it comes to us needing to change or something like that, right? I know for me, it's difficult. It's very difficult. I have a very hard time admitting that I'm wrong. My wife will attest to that. Okay. So Elijah starts to get a little worried, right? Things have not gone quite as he had hoped, I'm sure. I'm sure when fire falls down from heaven, you think, great, game over. Everybody's going to turn to God and we're going to just move on. Not the case. We're going to see it's quite the opposite. So picking up in verse 3. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. Sometimes people give Elijah some flack for this, right, because he takes off. But the truth of the matter is there are times in the Bible where it's the right thing to do. So if you think in Acts chapter 9, Paul becomes a Christian, and he starts teaching in the synagogues and whatnot about Christianity. And so the Jews pick up wind of this, and they think, wow, he's a traitor, let's kill him. And what happens after that? Well, the believers, they get him in a basket, they lower him over the wall, and he splits, right? Same sort of thing happens with Mary and Joseph. When they find out that Herod wants to kill Jesus, what does God actually tell them? Say, hey, get out of here, go to Egypt, get out of town. And so they do. So there's times where getting out of the situation is actually the right thing to do. Now, his fear may have been a little misguided, perhaps, because there was nothing for him to fear, right? God had it all under control. But I would argue that his actions are actually the correct thing. One of the interesting things that we pick up in here is also his servant. He has this unnamed servant that he leaves behind, which is in contrast to Elisha, who we're going to see later on. So later on, there's a point where Elijah and Elisha are walking together, and Elijah tells Elisha, listen, it's going to get hard. You might want to hang back and just stay here. And Elisha says, wherever you're going, I'm going, because you're following the Lord, and I want to follow him with you. That's basically what he says, right? And he actually tries to incentivize him not to come along with him, but Elisha pushes through. And this servant, in contrast, we don't even know his name. He decides to hang back. He decides to play it safe, right? I'm sure Elijah probably gave him the same thing. Like, look, it's going to get tough here, man. And he's probably like, okay, I'm going to stay here. And so there's a quote that I love by G.K. Chesterton, which says, when belief in God becomes difficult, the tendency is to turn away from him, but in heaven's name, to what? The same, I think, could be said after following God. Sometimes it gets difficult. There are times where God calls us to do things that are scary or just require a lot of us. And sometimes it's easy just to be like, well, you know what, I'm just going to step back from this one. But the question is, what do we miss out on? As G.K. Chesterton picks up here, you can't just turn away from something. Anytime you turn away from something, you're going to turn towards something else. It's just how it works. Then the question is, where are you going to turn to for life? Peter, so in the New Testament, Jesus is teaching the people, and he starts saying some things that are very difficult for them to understand or to accept, and they start turning away from him. And he turns to his disciples, are you guys going to leave me too? And what does Peter say? He says, where are we going to go? You have the words of life, right? At the end of the day, there are times where we want to turn away from God, where we want to stop following him. But ultimately, where are we going to turn for life? Where are you going to go for life? God is the God of life, and there is nowhere else to go. This is the truth. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means for us. Okay, picking up in verse 4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. So, a couple of things here. So, if Elijah really wanted to die, he could have just stayed put. There was a woman there who was more than willing and able to help him out with that, right? If that was really what he was looking for. I feel like I can kind of relate to this a little bit. So I've never gone through anything nearly as bad as Elijah. But fortunately for you guys, like my wife tells me all the time, I'm very dramatic. So things, maybe apply to me in ways that they shouldn't. But there are times where you just life gets tough, man, whether we like it or not. It's just the way it is. And there are those moments where you just think, man, you know what? Listen, I like you guys, but I'd rather be with God, if we would be perfectly honest. If God was like, okay, you can stay here or be with me, sorry, you guys are losing every time, right? And I think that's part of Elijah's heart. Is just like, you know what? It is tough. God, I would rather just be with you. It would be so much easier. We wouldn't have to deal with all this stress. We wouldn't have to deal with the weight of the world. We'd just be together, and that's ultimately, and I think ultimately that's part of God's heart as well. God wants us to be with him. But as we're going to see, God has plans for Elijah. He's not done with him here. But yeah, I can understand this. I don't think he really necessarily, wanted to die per se, but he wanted to be removed from the situation, right? He wanted to be taken away into a better one. And he even says here in verse 4, no better than my fathers. He comes to a point where he really recognizes that he's got no power to change anybody. They just witnessed the greatest miracle. And honestly, it didn't have anything really to do with Elijah. All he did was he built an altar, he prepared a bull, and that was it. He didn't make the fire happen. That was what God did, right? God actually performed the miracle. Elijah just did what he could, what God called him to do. And he realizes, okay, if God's sending down fire from heaven isn't going to change people, I got nothing, right? There's no way I'm gonna really be able to do anything for anybody. And that's kind of true. That's not the whole truth, but it's a part of it. And so he comes to this realization that he's not any better than anybody that's come before him. And what's interesting too is this imagery of a broom tree. So we're not real familiar with broom trees, but I'm going to make you a little more familiar. So broom trees were used back in the day for starting fires, and the reason was, you start burning the wood, it turns to coals, and eventually it turns to ashes. Now, what makes the broom tree a little unique is that once it turned to ashes, it still retains a lot of its heat. So it's great for starting fires and keeping fires going, right? And the imagery that's being conveyed here is, look, Elijah is a guy who is burned out. He is ashes right now. He has nothing left to offer. He has nothing left to go on. He is at his rock bottom point right here. And we're going to see how God responds to him. So picking up in verse 5. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree, and behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. So God sees this. He sees Elijah. He sees that he's desperate, right? And what does he do? He delivers him, but probably not in the way that Elijah was looking for. So Elijah, he asks that, hey, just God, remove me from the situation entirely, right? God doesn't do that. He probably also would have liked it if God, actually, I don't know, if Israel just turned towards God. I mean, that was what Elijah was hoping for to begin with, right? That Israel would turn their hearts to him, that everything would be better, you know what I mean? He wouldn't have to run for his life, all these things. That's what he was ultimately hoping for. But neither of those things happen. What does happen? Well, God gives him what he needs to endure through his circumstances, right? Paul has a very similar situation. If you don't have to turn there, but I'm just going to read it. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 7 through 9, Paul writes, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So usually, when we come through difficult times, our knee-jerk reaction is, well, God, get me out of this. You know what I mean? Or God, take the situation away from me. But there are times when God calls us to a higher calling, which is, okay, I'm not going to take you out of this, but I am going to help you through this difficult times, right? There's times where God calls us, has a higher calling for us. Another good example of that is like imprecatory psalms. If you read in Psalms, there's all these psalms. They call them imprecatory. If you go to like seminary, you'll hear that term. But basically, the psalms are all the same, where it says, okay, here are my enemies. They're evil. Take them out, Lord. Like, that's basically what they all boil down to, right? And then Jesus comes along and says, oh, you got enemies? I got the solution for you. Love your enemies. Do good to those who curse you. Do good to those who spitefully use you. Bless those who curse you, right? He has a higher calling. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, it's a demonstration of who God is, really. When we get a chance to step into that higher road, right? That's the road that God takes for us, right? God would have been, so just look at humanity. God would have been completely within his rights to just, humanity sinned and blew it, gone. All right, start over again, right? He could have, but he didn't. He sent Christ to die for us instead. He took the high road to redeem us. And when he gives us a chance to do that, that's how we really get to learn more about God and the person of God. Because we're experiential creatures. That's the way we learn things. And furthermore, it's how God grows us. If everything was easy, nobody would be, we wouldn't be constantly being molded in the shape of Christ. That's not something that just happens. It's something that happens through usually adversity. So, for instance, the example I usually give is weightlifting. So, I don't know if any of you guys have ever been to the gym or whatever, but if you are going to the gym and you just do the same workouts over and over again, you lift the same weight and you do the same amount of reps and you just do that day in, day out, you will get really good at lifting those weights at that many times, right? But you're never going to grow. You're never going to get more strength. You're never going to build more muscle. In order to do that, you got to up the weight. You got to keep adding to it, right? And make it tougher and tougher and tougher to keep lifting that. It's the same way with us. God is going to stretch you. Some of you might be being stretched right now. It's probably, if I guess, I'd say you probably are. But this is how God works in us, right? He puts us through difficult situations. And it refines us, right? It's like a refiner's fire. The thing about it is that sometimes we feel like it's too much, right? There's a quote. I love this quote. It's from, I actually saw it on like a T-shirt, I think, at the gym one time. And basically, the quote is, "Your body will quit." No, what is it? No, I'm sorry, I'm butchering it, so that's not good. Your mind will quit 1,000 times before your body does, right? And that's very true. I can tell you, I used to play football, and I can tell you, like, if it wasn't for my coaches pushing me through a lot of the stuff that we did, like I would have been like, I can't do this. And sometimes we feel that way, right? We feel like we can't go any further. We can't endure anymore. But God knows us He knows us better than we know ourselves, right? And the truth of the matter is, God's not going to put you in a situation that you can't handle. The question is, when we're going through difficulties, do we ask God for deliverance from those circumstances, or do we ask God for the grace to endure? In Isaiah 42, verse 3, God says, "A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench." God is not going to let you guys be put out, right? He's not going to give you more than you can handle. It may feel like that sometimes. The question is, do we trust God in that? Do we trust that God is going to put us in circumstances that we're able to navigate through, or do we not trust Him? And if we don't, we're gonna falter in those points of our lives. Okay, picking up in verse 9. There he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek to take it away." So God asked a pretty straightforward question, but he gets kind of a mouthful, right? A lot of what Elijah says here really doesn't have anything to do with the question. And usually what that shows is that there's a lot going on in Elijah right now, right? He is a little troubled by all the circumstances that are going on around him, and that's why most of his response, really only the last thing he says there applies, right? That he's basically running for his life. That he could have just said that, and that would have been it, right? But he unloads this whole thing on God, right? So how does God respond to him in this? In verse 11, "And he, God, said, 'Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord.' And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper." What God is telling him here, and this, when you read this the first time, you're like, it's kind of a confusing interaction. But what God is really showing him here is, look, Elijah, you are so focused on all the stuff that's going on around you, all of the troubles, all of the things that you think are wrong, and you're forgetting that I'm right here. But in order to see me, you have to focus on me. You got to stop focusing on your circumstances and the things that are going on around you, and quiet yourself and focus on me, because I'm right here, okay? And we see Elijah's response right here in verse 13. "And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave." So he literally takes his cloak and wraps it around his face, and he puts blinders on. He's like, okay, I'm going to literally just physically tune out everything that's going on so I can focus on the Lord. Maybe some of you need to do that today. Maybe you need to get in your prayer closet. Maybe you need to get in the woods by yourself or something like that. But there is something to be said about putting yourself in a place where you can focus on the Lord. As a kind of a practical application here that Elijah gives us. So picking up back in 13 again. "And behold, there came a voice to him. He said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He said, 'I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, Even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So, a little bit of deja vu here, right? I mean, literally verbatim, the exact same conversation. Like, it's just now, they had a little, God showed them one thing, but now they come right back to it, right? And when Elijah does start focusing on God, he still has the same problems before him, right? And what are they? Basically, it boils down to three things. I've been living this righteous life, and I'm the one that's suffering. Everybody is turning away from God, despite what he's done, and it's to their detriment and to God's ultimate dishonor, right? And I'm all alone. I'm all by myself here. And these are the three things that he comes with. I mean, there's a certain sense of truth to all of that. But it's not the whole truth. And we're going to see God's response to that. So in verse 15, and the Lord said to him, go return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. Did I say, I can't tell if I'm saying Syria the first time or Israel. Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm not. I don't know. Sorry. Just having a moment of doubt here. Okay, when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah, you shall anoint to be the prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death, and the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So God actually gives him something that most of us don't get, right? Which is a glimpse into his plan, right? God says, okay, listen, Elijah, I get it, right? You're looking at all these things that are going around and saying it's not right. Justice is on its way. It's going to come. God does not allow his justice to rest forever. Eventually, he brings judgment, and he says it's coming. Not only that, you're not alone, Elijah. I've got 7,000 people that I've saved for myself that have not bowed the knee to Baal, right? You may think you're alone, and that may even be a slim amount of people. So 7,000, especially in the scheme of like hundreds of thousands of people that may have been living in Israel, it's still a low margin, but God says, don't worry, I got it, right? I got enough people. And then he also says to him, look, not only am I giving you help, I'm actually bringing in the bullpen. Like your time is coming to an end, Elijah. There's someone coming to take your place. And while it's tough now, that rest is coming. So the thing about it, Elijah, like I said, this is kind of a rare thing. Usually God doesn't supernaturally just reach out to us and be like, hey, look, this is the whole plan. Don't worry about it. We got this, right? Usually we're a little in the dark about what's going on. A lot of times we go through difficulties and things like that, wondering why. Like, why is this all happening to me? Why am I going through this time? Os Guinness, I collect quotes, and this is one of my favorites from a guy named Os Guinness. Christians do not say to God, I do not understand you at all, but I trust you anyway. That would be suicidal. Rather, they say, Father, I do not understand you, but I trust you. Or more accurately, I do not understand you in this situation, but I understand why I trust you anyway. It is therefore reasonable to trust even when we do not understand. We may be in the dark about what God is doing, but we are not in the dark about God. The thing about it is, let's say just a stranger walked up to you. They gave you a cup, and they said, yo, you got to try this. You might be like, well, you're probably not going to be like, sure, thanks, Glug, right? You're more probably like, ask some questions. Even if they answer those questions, you're probably like, nah, that's okay. You can hang on to that. I don't know what it is. It's yours. But if someone you know and you love, right, is sister, brother, mother, whoever, right, someone you know and you trust, they come to you and say, yo, you got to try this. You might still have some questions, but you're more likely to like give it a shot, right? Because you're like, sure, like, maybe it's fantastic, or maybe it's something that's gonna blow your mind. And that's right? What Os Guinness is basically saying here is like, look, if we didn't know anything about God, trusting him could be somewhat detrimental, right? But the fact of the matter is, while we don't know what God is always doing, we do know something about God, right? We know a lot about God, and what have we seen in his word? That he loves us, right? And the ultimate proof of that is Jesus, right? So sometimes I think we fail. I'm pretty sure we all fail to miss the gravity of the sacrifice of Christ. None of us truly understand it. But this is what you do have to understand. There was no higher price to be paid, right? Like Jesus comes down, he lives a perfect life, and he essentially takes on the moral debt that we owed, that we could not repay. And like, imagine if like the price was like, $1 million or whatever. That's a pretty low price. But God just be like, boom, done, no problem, right? There's nothing in creation that would suffice. God pays the price with himself. There was no higher price to be paid. There's nothing like God. He's an uncreated being, and therefore, we have no capacity to even imagine something that's. And why? Why does he do this? Why does he step in and intervene? Well, it's because he loves us, right? And that's the thing you got to realize is that God loves you today. And if you're going through difficulties, you got to understand God loves you. He's letting you go through these things for a reason. As Paul said, in his case, it's to keep him from being conceited. Maybe there's other reasons for it. Maybe it's to help you grow. Maybe it's to show you more about him. Who knows? But God is not unaware of your situations, and he's ordained it, and he's with you. And if you're not going through difficulties, guess what? They're probably going to come. I would probably bank on it. I know difficulties are probably coming from me. I mean, I've had some, but, I'm kind of planning for it, right? Which is probably a good thing. We probably all should. How do we trust God? Well, the answer is like what Oscar was saying, to know him, right? To know him more. The more we know him, the more we can, the easier it is for us to put our trust and our faith in him. So I'm going to go ahead and call the band up here. And for you guys today, maybe you've never even taken that first step. Maybe you say, man, I'm sitting here, I've never even known Jesus. Well, today's the day, man. Today's the day. Don't waste any more time. If you don't know Jesus at all, come talk to me. Talk to Ezra, Keith, Brian, whoever. We want you to know him. And for some of you maybe are going through difficulties right now, and you're saying, man, I'm struggling, having a hard time understanding why. Maybe you need to know him more. And that's not going to come overnight per se, but we would at least like to pray for you and help you. Because, you can intellectually know things, but sometimes in the heart, that's a little harder, right? And that's why we have the body of Christ. We're the hands and feet of Christ. We want to reach out and help you. So.